Hi everyone, and welcome to TLDR Week 2 for Linux Administration. The outcomes for the week: I want you to be able to create scripts to do some user management, explain some of the common things you'll need to do for your users, be able to securely manage your users, and also be able to start working on creating control groups with defaults. There's going to be quite a bit of lab work that you're going to need to be doing this week, which I will go over at the end. So now that you have your servers all set up, with Linux, because these are intended to be multi-user systems, the next thing that you're going to need to do is start getting some users. So you want to make sure that as you are adding your users, you are setting them up with the correct defaults and you have a general naming scheme. Now, usually in industry, the best practices means that you are going to document everything and keep your documents up to date. It's really important that you have procedures. If you have a specific procedure, you should have a script to make sure that you are doing everything that you need to do. For example, if somebody is being hired, there's probably a set amount of things that need to happen, such as user created, password given, perhaps access to specific systems, and a script will allow you to do that and make sure you don't forget anything. The documentation is to make sure that when you are ready to pass this on to somebody else, they will know everything that you did. It is important to document not just so that you can easily share information with your colleagues, but also so that when you look back, you can know everything that you've done and why you've done it. In general, best practices also include being careful about who has admin and root access, what you are actually doing as admin or root, being careful about allowing remote access. If you are going to allow remote access, make sure you have some limitations on that. Best practices are also going to include a backup policy. You want to think about things like on-site versus off-site options, as well as the different kinds of backups, such as a full backup or an incremental backup. Which one makes the most sense for your company and how often you're doing them? Are you doing backups daily, weekly, monthly, all of the above? Do you do different backups depending on for example, a day we might do an incremental backup, but once a week we might do a full backup? You also want to think about what you want to have for a single sign-on versus multiple accounts. Single sign-on, keys to the kingdom, means that people only have to log in once for multiple accounts. That, of course, has the downside of they only have one password. If that's lost, it's a problem. And the current best practices is that you use multi-factor authentication. Multi-factor authentication means that you want more than just the password, the something you know factor. You also want to do something like, for example, perhaps have a something you have factor, which could include a text message or a key fob type of thing. Now, when we talk about user security, we want to talk about least privilege. The principle of least privilege means that you want to be careful to only give people privileges as they need them. This is a better way to do it, to make sure that you aren't giving people too many privileges that they shouldn't have, either because that can be more insecure for the system or concerns can arise if they have more access than they should. It's also important to make sure that you are careful and polite with your users. It is way too easy to get antagonistic with your users and start getting kind of nasty to them when they do things that you see as frustrating or silly. And it's important that you start thinking about it from their point of view and make sure that you are giving calm, polite explanations. If you're going to be doing sysadmin work, you're going to be dealing with some stressed out people, and you need to make sure that you're staying calm while you're doing that. You also want to think about the difference when you're logging into your system. Are you logging in as root or are you just using sudo? And then when we talk about user security, we want to think about things like disk usage. Are they using an inordinate amount of space? And do you want to consider tools such as fail to ban, where you can actually stop people from logging in if they have too many failed logins as a security precaution? Password management, You want to start thinking about things like how you're going to set up your multi-factor authentication. What is a reasonable password length? Do you want to require special characters? Do you want to have a frequency of changing or password aging, where, for example, people have to change passwords every 30 days, 60 days, 90 days? Do you want to restrict people using old passwords? Some people have actually started using checkers to see if passwords have been stolen before allowing it to be used. And I've included a couple of examples of where you can actually go find that. One of my favorites is haveibeenpwned.com, and you can actually check some of your passwords if you're interested. Different type of accounts on your system are going to be used. We're going to have plain user accounts. This is just people logging in and working on the system, but you're also going to have admin and root accounts. This is going to be what you as a sysadmin would be doing on the system. Admin or root accounts are going to end up having significantly more privileges and abilities. For example, perhaps a regular user account would not be allowed to install things, but a root account would. Root would have full permissions to the whole system. There's also going to be some system accounts. For example, if you have a web server, you're going to see Apache. That's not exactly a user account. That's an account that was created for the web server. You're also going to see daemon accounts, which is the background processes. Now, what you're looking at on the screen right now is some key files that I have pulled up, and we are going to do an activity for these key files. What I'd like you to do is go find those files in your system and add their location to your documentation. Now, I have given some examples of these files and where they live. In this particular case, all of these are living in Etsy. I, however, make no promises about where things like the password account with user info or the group account, which is going to list groups and users, actually live in your system. So for the activity, I want you to go find them. Feel free to pause me here and come back after you've done that. Next, we're going to talk about users and groups. Users are always going to be identified by a user ID number. Groups are identified by a group ID number. Both of these are going to use sequential numbering by default. Everybody should have a home directory, and I want you to think about where yours is. Is everybody the same? Perhaps you would like to have a different setup depending on different jobs. For example, if you are creating accounts for developers or devs, perhaps they would like to use C Shell instead of Bash. It's also worth looking at the Etsy shadow file, and you can see there are some special symbols in the file, such as no logon, or perhaps you will see false shells. Can you think about why you would see those and what these actually mean in relation to the user that they are matched with? Admin accounts. On a Linux system, we end up talking about admins as root users a lot of the time. If somebody is logged in as root, it means that they have full permissions to do anything that they would like on the system. One of the cautions that I will usually give people is it is generally better to use sudo rather than log in as root, because there are some things that can go very badly if you do them as root, and it also means that any accidents you have are much more serious if you are logged in as root. Sudo allows you to run a single command with root privileges. One of the really nice tricks that I've learned over the years is if you do bang bang or 2 exclamation points, that actually means previous command. So if you run a command and you get a permission denied, you can actually say sudo space bang bang, and that will run the previous command as sudo. I actually use that very frequently when I'm running a server. Now, when we have the different groups on our server, we are going to have some people that we would like to give extra access to. For example, junior admins might need more access than the average person. So there's actually two options for that. There's the wheel group and the sudoers group. Wheel is if you had root access, this is actually considered legacy. The current best practices is that you use the sudoers group because sudoers gives you more shades of control. You can still give people the correct access using sudoers, but you have a little bit more control in terms of exactly how much access you're giving them versus the wheel group, which is just basically here, have everything. What you'll see on the screen right now is some frequently used commands such as user add to create new accounts, user mod to modify accounts, password to assign passwords, or things like last log to see the last login of users. The next thing that you should start thinking about is creating some useful scripts. What scripts do you think would be useful if you are going to be running a server? I have some suggestions. One of them is bulk adding or bulk deleting users. If you are going to be working at a company that is going to have people coming in and going out, it's worth thinking about creating a script that will add users by bulk so that you don't have to add them one at a time. You probably also want to have a bulk delete. You want to think about what makes the most sense for your delete. Does it make sense to completely delete the users and then clean up their files? Or perhaps it makes more sense to set the users to a no login and leave all of their files for a specific amount of time. And if you want to make that choice, the next question you have to ask yourself is, what's a reasonable amount of time? You probably also want to think about some scripts such as disk usage monitoring, perhaps listing accounts that have never logged in, or looking at files that are being taken off your server, exfiltration to see if that's something that you might want to be concerned about. Now, the activity for the week is actually quite a bit of work. I am having the activity for a week be a user management challenge. You are going to be creating a script that will add users. These users should have their own groups with associated folders. Each of these groups are going to be things like temporary workers, developers, or just general workers. And you need to spend some time and your best judgment thinking about what each of those groups needs. For a little bit of extra challenge, I've added level 1 and level 2 usernames. One of the things that you need to think about as you are creating your user add scripts is, what is a name? When we're thinking about names, we can think about our own names, and perhaps your name is a simple first name, last name type of setup. However, not everybody's name is going to be like that, and you need to give some thought to the different types of names and naming schemes there are out there in the world. Do you, for example, can you think of any names that have special characters, or perhaps names that are multiple names instead of just first name, last name? There's some places in the world where you're going to have multiple last names. These all need to be taken into account when you are creating your users to make sure that the user add scripts will work on everybody. To go with this, there's a activity where you're going to be getting some practice with grep, sed, and awk. I will link to the textbook that has the chapters that you should read along with the activities in the description for this video. Sed and awk are really important power tools for Linux admins to be able to use, and I would like you to start getting some practice for them. When you are turning in your user script, when you're creating it, please make sure you are adding it to GitHub. Please make sure that your user script is your own. Do not just Google around. I know there are a lot of user scripts out there, but the point is you learning to practice creating scripts as you need them. And I also want you to have a short document that is going to be how you are setting up your username rules. For example, are you doing first letter of the first name, last name? Are you doing first name only, last name only? Do you have random characters in there? And you should also include who is going into which group and the extra rules and regulations you think about for each group. Make sure you give this a lot of thought and consideration as you are putting this together. If you have any questions, please let me know.